Morning, everybody. My name is Ned Cake. I'll be moderating the session this morning. Thank you for joining us for the SHRUG 2020 virtual conference. You are in the ArcGIS Pro Is It Ready to Be My Primary GIS Desktop App presentation by Tripp Corbin. We're set to go from 9:45 to 10:30. Tripp, it'll be up to you how you want to take questions. If you want me to weigh in when we have a few, I'll do that. Just let me know, okay?
Okay. Yeah, just let's weigh in as they come up. That way we're on topic and we try to get them in case I run long, which we know I tend to do.
It could happen. All right, so give me just a second and I will make you presenter. You are now presenter, sir. Thank you.
Very good. Now which screen is showing? Let's go with that one. So hopefully everybody can see my screen.
We can.
Outstanding. So what I want to do, oops, went a little quick. So first, welcome everybody. Glad you could make it here for the virtual SHRUG GIS workshop. While it is disappointing that we couldn't all get together like we do every year, it is still nice to be able to do this. And I appreciate the SHRUG staff for working so hard to put together a great program and making sure we still had this education opportunity. So thanks to all y'all and your hard work. I greatly appreciate it. So with that, let's talk about ArcPro. Yeah, ArcPro has now been out for almost, well, I wouldn't say almost, it's been out for about 5 years now. First came out in 2015. And we're now up to version 2.6.3. And I'm currently beta testing 2.7. So it's had some opportunity to really get fleshed out and increase the capabilities, functionality, stability, and all those wonderful things that we look for as a primary desktop GIS application. But what I want to do is really go through and try to highlight a lot of what it can do, some of what it can't do, where it stands, and all those things so that you can choose or make the decision, I should say, on whether it's at a point now that you could switch over and make it your primary application. I know I do. I use ArcPro almost exclusively for all of my work in GIS. Talking to Ned before this started, he uses it for most of what he does in GIS. So, you know, I would consider us two fairly heavy hitters when it comes to using GIS applications. So I think that's a good sign as to what the current maturity level of the application is. So hopefully that gives y'all a little confidence in it potentially. So as I mentioned, ArcPro first came out in 2015, and I can tell you, having worked with ArcPro since before it was released, when it was still in beta, those initial versions of Pro, the 1.0 and all that, were very flaky. They did tend to crash a good bit. There was a lot of functionality that was missing in it, but I think they've come a long way over these 5 years. And a lot of folks are saying, oh my God, why is it taking this long to get some of the functionality in there and all that? And well, what you have to understand is that ArcPro is just not a facelift for ArcMap. It is a completely new product. They started from scratch with a whole new architecture to build ArcPro. ArcPro is built on a .NET architecture, whereas ArcMap, ArcCatalog, ArcScene, ArcGlobe are built on a COM architecture. Now, when ArcGIS Desktop first came out, that was 1999. And the COM architecture was the top of the line stuff. But over the 20 years or so that ArcMap and all that have been out, obviously things have changed a good bit. So with this .NET architecture that Pro is built on, it really allows the application to leverage a lot of the new technologies that come out with processors, graphics cards, RAM, so forth and so on, that just didn't exist when ArcMap was first created. So that's really nice. I think it gives us a greater capability than what we've had. And, you know, we got to face the music if you're in the Esri environment. Arc Pro is replacing ArcMap, ArcCatalog, ArcScene, and ArcGlobe. Esri's finally admitted to that. They actually finally admitted to it a few years ago. When Arc Pro first came out, they were very wishy-washy about whether that was the case. But now they finally have come out and said, yes, it will be replacing that. Now, the exact time frame of when that is happening keeps changing. There was some question whether there was going to be an ArcMap 10.8, and we have it. They just had a fairly recent article come out that said support for ArcMap and ArcCatalog was going to continue for a few more years at least. So you don't necessarily have to make this change immediately. You do still have time to plan it out, assuming that Esri stays on track with their predictions. The other thing to keep in mind here is this all has to run on top of something, and that would be your operating system. And because ArcMap and ArcScene and ArcGlobe are 32-bit, if Microsoft decides to pull support in the next version of Windows, for example, for 32-bit applications, then that's something Esri doesn't have control of. So not saying that Microsoft is going to do that, but if they did, then that would, regardless of what Esri says, that would effectively kill ArcMap and ArcCatalog on the new OS. But that's something to keep in mind, that is something outside of Esri's control. So going in, beginning planning for that switch over, that migration, if you haven't already done so, is definitely something you want to look at and consider again, in the near future. So Esri is really focusing all of their development on new functionality, capability in Arc Pro. And we see that with the new versions that keep coming out like every quarter on this, with each one having more capability than the last. It's not just bug fixes. And that's really all you're getting right now with ArcMap and ArcCatalog, as well as ArcScene as ArcGlobe, is bug fixes and security patches. Pardon me while I take a sip of coffee here. So, that's, again, keep that in mind as we're looking at working with LiDAR and voxel layers and other things like that as we move into big data stuff. So let's look at a basic comparison of ArcMap and ArcPro. This is very basic. We'll do a little bit more as we go forward, but just a general comparison of the two applications and some of the capabilities here. So first off, ArcMap, because it is 32-bit, it only supports up to 4 gigabytes of RAM. So it doesn't matter if your system has 8, 16, 32, or more gigabytes of RAM. ArcMap will only ever see and be able to use 4 gigabytes. And that's part of the reason, if anybody works with large data sets, that you will have trouble with ArcMap and often have to split those up into chunks. And I know I've had to do that. I do a lot of work with various cities in Fulton County, which is where the city of Atlanta is. And anytime I have to work with the county's parcel data, which is, I don't know, somewhere 300,000-400,000 or more parcels in there, I have to cut it up into chunks in order to work with it in ArcMap so that it doesn't crash. With ArcPro, because of its 64-bit nature, it can use as much RAM as you have. My current system has 32 gigabytes of RAM. I can pull the Fulton County parcel data in. I can do whatever analysis I need to do with it. And it doesn't crash because of memory problems. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't crash. I mean, ArcMap still crashes after being around for 20 years. ArcPro will also occasionally crash. I can't tell you it's not, but it's, to me, I found it to be at least as stable as ArcMap if you have the right hardware to run it on. And that is important. It also, ArcPro supports multiple cores. So for those that were in my talk yesterday on the basic components of a computer, you'll know that a core is basically a mini processor on your main CPU. And when you go buy a new computer nowadays, when you look at the CPU or the computer processing unit on there, you're going to get a dual core, quad core, and even the new ones have 6 cores, 8 cores, 12, 16, and more cores on there. And like I said, those are basically mini processors on the main processor that if an application is designed to use it, it can actually split the workload across those individual cores. So no one core is having to do it all, which means it's faster, more flexible, handles larger data, so forth, so on. Well, when ArcMap was created in '99, that didn't exist. Pretty much every workstation, except some of your very higher end workstations and or servers, only had one CPU, and that's one CPU had one core on it. So ArcMap really wasn't designed to work with multiple cores. So you don't really get to leverage the advantage that a newer computer, say one that you bought in the last 5 to 8 years, is at least got 2 cores in it, more than likely, probably 4, if it's really a GIS style workstation. But now, like I said, the new processors that AMD just released start at 6 cores and go up to 12 or 16 cores from that. So that's good to know. GPU, which is graphics processing units, again, those that were in my thing yesterday, we talked about that a good bit. ArcPro is designed, and not even, I want to say it's designed to use one, it really requires one, that dedicated graphics card, whether it's NVIDIA or AMD or one of their board partners out there. You really, with ArcPro, you need one of those. Not to say that ArcMap won't benefit from having one of those, especially if you're on the low end of that RAM spectrum. If you're at only 4 gigs in your total system, then ArcMap can certainly use the graphics card to help with rendering, but it doesn't really leverage it fully. Whereas ArcPro actually will not only just use it for rendering, which is important, as we'll see in a minute, but it can also use it for certain like image processing. It can actually leverage that GPU instead of just the CPU to do certain image processing, which also then means it can leverage some of the graphics memory that's on that dedicated card too, which further increases performance. The interface in Pro is that ribbon interface like you see in Word and Excel and AutoCAD and Photoshop and so on. Whereas ArcMap still uses those old toolbars. Now, don't get me wrong, when ArcMap first came out in '99, the toolbars were a godsend compared to the old command line ArcInfo workstation that we had to, keyboard jockey everything. The ribbon interface in Pro, I find much more intuitive as a instructor for new users. They pick up that new interface a lot faster, and I mean like 2 to 3 times faster than the toolbar interface in ArcMap. Now, for those that are long-term ArcMap users, are you going to like the ribbon to start with? Probably not, because you know where everything is in ArcMap, and when you go to Pro, everything's different. Yeah, can be a pain from a migration standpoint, but for new users, it is much more intuitive, and I think you'll see that in a second. ArcPro also supports 3D visualization without an extension, which is kind of cool. So in ArcMap, if you wanted to look at data in 3D, you had to have the 3D Analyst extension and then open either ArcScene or ArcGlobe to view the data in 3D. ArcPro out of the box without any extension allows you to view and edit data in 3D. Now, if you want to do analysis like viewshed analysis, watershed analysis, those kind of things, you will need an extension. So you'll need the 3D Analyst extension or Spatial Analyst extension, just like you did in ArcMap. And Pro has those. So all of those extensions that are there in ArcMap are also available in Pro. One of the last things, if you're looking at migrating to Pro as your primary desktop, is the Python version. So Pro being 64-bit does use a different version of Python. It's 3.6.10 in the most current version of Pro, whereas ArcMap, the most current version of ArcMap, 10.8.1, is using Python 2.7.8. So you will have to do some tweaking, upgrading, recoding, whatever you want to call it, of any existing Python scripts that you run in ArcMap that you want to bring into Pro. Also, unless they've changed something, it's possible they did and I somehow missed it, but as far as I know, if you have any Python add-ins, so those basically Python extensions where you have toolbars and tools and UIs for Python in ArcMap, those will not translate to Pro. Pro does not support Python add-ins. I don't know if they will, and I don't know where the limitation is on that. But you would have to then update those and use something built in .NET to put a UI to any of that Python tools you had created before. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So if you have any of those types of customizations, you'll need to do that. Okay. Ned, any questions so far?
Not yet, but I want to encourage everybody to enter questions as we go along if you have any, and we'll make sure Tripp gets to follow up on them. Thank you.
Okay, good. So what I want to do real quick is we'll jump over into Pro and just take a quick little tour of it here so you can see it. So I'm already in Pro. I've got a project open. So this is another thing with Pro that's different, is it uses project files, APRXs. So if we have anybody that is old like me that remembers ArcView GIS and its APR files, its project files, ArcPro has, I guess, reinvented that, reinitiated that, whatever we want to call it. So what that means is that unlike ArcMap and an MXD, right, you could only have one layout and you had one basic map. You could have different data frames in the map, but you were just limited to that one thing. Well, in a project in ArcPro, you can have multiple maps. So here's a single project, and you see I've got a slew of maps included in this. And there's a 2D map like the water system one we're seeing here. There's a 3D demo. So this is what I'm talking about with the 3D visualization. So here's a 3D scene that we've created in ArcPro. And again, this is something that's created out of the box. There's no extension required to generate this kind of view of your data. And just because data is not started in 3D, so I'm going to give you an example here where I've got the number of GISPs, GIS certified professionals by state in the US, right? I could take and turn that into a 3D scene. And there we go. That comes up so we can view any data, even data that starts out as 2D in 3D right out of the box. Again, now if I want to do some sort of, we'll go back to this one, some sort of view shed analysis about, if I'm standing at the top of this building, what can I see? Or if I'm on the second floor, what does that look like? Maybe I'm doing that for property assessment. Maybe I'm doing it for some sort of emergency response scenario, whatever. I would still need the 3D analyst extension to do that. But just to view data in 3D, to go from 2D to 3D, you can do that all right out of the box, which I think is pretty cool. It really opens up a whole new way for us to look at and visualize our data. And just think, if I'm presenting on, say, population growth in my county or income levels within my county or city, looking at those numbers as a traditional color-coded map like this, not to say that's not impactful and not useful, but it doesn't carry quite the same oomph as looking at it in something like this 3D view. So again, that capability is kind of neat to have and add to your arsenal if you don't already have it there. So anyway, pretty excited with that. So I'm going to close some of these down to keep that.
We do have a few questions starting to roll in. Let me know when you're ready.
Sure, go ahead, shoot.
Elizabeth Broomfield would like you to repeat your comment about Microsoft operating system breaking ArcMap.
Well, okay, so if Microsoft were to decide that they didn't want to support 32-bit applications anymore in their 64-bit OS, which is what most computers are running nowadays, then from that version of Windows going forward, ArcMap and ArcCatalog, ArcScene, and ArcGlobe would not be able to run natively in that OS. Now, the chance that Microsoft would actually do that right now, because I think many of their Office applications are still 32-bit, is probably pretty slim, but it is possible.
Okay. Alex Harrell would like to know, in 3D modeling in Pro, what is the recommended way to skin the models?
Recommended way to skin the models, is that kind of like what I've got here with the buildings? Is that what he's asking about?
I think so. We'd have to follow up.
Okay, assuming that's what he's talking about.
Yes. He says
okay,
yes.
good. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to just do analysis, then there's no need to put one of these fancy skins like you see here on. If you do want to do a more realistic scene, similar to what you see here, then the best way to do the skins is via City Engine. You create the, I forget the file extension type, but you create those procedural rule symbols. I think it's RPK is the file extension. Anyway, in City Engine, and then you can bring that directly into ArcGIS Pro. That's probably the preferred method. So.
Okay. Do you want to continue or take a few more questions?
Let's go ahead and take, if they're related to stuff, let's go ahead and take a couple more questions.
Okay. Jacob Coble would like to know, are they going to have more metadata tools where you can make models or scripts to batch process metadata, conversion to different styles, export to HTML, etc.?
That's a good question. They have been working to expand some of the metadata tools. I do not know how far they're going to take those. I know, judging by the current versions, that whatever ArcMap is currently capable of doing, if they haven't got it, they intend to get it to that point with metadata.
Good. And another one, I know you mentioned Pro crashing less, viewing larger data sets, but what about speed in ArcMap versus Pro on processing speed for large data sets? I noticed Pro could take 2 to 3 times longer to make mass edits on larger data sets.
Okay.
That's from Jonathan Nobles.
Yep. So that's a good question. Now, I think the speed right now is dependent on the type of data you're connecting to. We have experienced some slowdowns when trying to do what you're talking about, mass calculations into an SDE database. I have not experienced those with a file geodatabase. Now, and Esri's aware of that because we're not the only ones that have seen that. It's been reported. I have just started beta testing 2.7, which, according to Esri, and this came from them directly yesterday, when I actually emailed Jack and some others up there about benchmarks for hardware, they said that 2.7 is focused a lot on improving overall performance in ArcPro. Now, what that means exactly, I can't tell you. I've just started beta testing, but I intend to try to do exactly what you're talking about, is do mass calculations in an SDE database and compare that to a file geodatabase to see if that has improved. The other issue we have seen is text. So whether that's annotation feature classes or map anno, it does seem to render text a bit slower than ArcMap. We're working with a client right now who is trying to migrate over to Pro as well as the cloud all at the same time. And their templates that they use contain a lot of annotation. And if you turn the annotation off, ArcPro is actually much faster than ArcMap. It's just when that text, those text layers and their annotation layers come on, that it slows down. So there does seem to be some some issues with some of that performance.
So I got one more here for you. And
Okay.
that is, this is a good question from Nani Castro. In ArcMap, I've set up a lot of styles and templates. I use them often. Can I import them into ArcPro, or do I have to start all over?
So no, absolutely you can import them. So for example, you've got any MXDs that you serve as map templates. If you go up to Insert, you will see Import Map. This tool here will allow you, bring this over, to import any MXD into your project. So whether it's a template MXD or an active MXD, so all of your ArcMap stuff can come in. As far as styles, yes. So you'll see over here in the catalog pane, there's a styles folder, and you can see I've got several that I imported from ArcMap here. So it's just as simple as right click, import, import, and then you go find that styles that you built, that style file you built that had those custom ones in there. So yes, you can import those in. As I was talking about a current client we're working with, they did that with some of their map templates that had a lot of text in them, map annotation, and that did seem to cause some slowdown. So be aware of that. I should mention that ArcPro, it does now support map annotation, but that's something they just added at 2.6, so it's still a little clunky. It works, but it's still a bit clunky, so it's something to keep in mind. I'm sure it'll get much better.
All right. This is from Craig Anderson. Do you think the development in performance is just over developing some other components like ArcPro/AGO Bridge?
I'm sorry, I don't say the question again.
Do you think the development in performance is justified over developing some other components like the ArcPro/AGO Bridge?
I would say I do think it is, because based on my personal experiences working with users of Esri products across the country, that most people are still primarily operating in a local network environment and not utilizing Arc Online as much. Now, that's growing, yes, but in general, people are still more local based. So improving performance, working with SD data sets, working with text and those things, I think would has a bigger benefit to a larger segment of the user base than focusing on improvements to the AGOL connection, which is still pretty good. I mean, ArcPro was built from the get-go to be linked in with ArcGIS Online, as well as Portal for ArcGIS. So that's pretty good, but.
Good. So I think it's time to let you continue on, and we'll pick up some more questions towards the end.
Okay. Sounds good. What time are we going to? Is it 10:30?
10:30. So we got 15 minutes.
Okay. So we'll keep taking a quick look at a couple of things. I've already showed you a few things that we have here. Some of the other nice things with ArcPro in a single project, we can now have multiple layouts. So this, again, for those of us that go back to ArcView, we remember being able to have an APR with multiple layouts. And when ArcGIS, ArcMap came out, this is one of the big things we were all screaming about. How dare you take this functionality away from us? So now it's back, which makes, I think, file management, project management a good bit easier, because all of this can be in one single APRX file instead of having to hunt through 20, 30, 50, 100 MXDs to find the right one. So I think that's kind of cool. So there's another couple of things with Pro that you need to be aware of that are recent changes and that have probably stopped some folks from migrating. When ArcPro, first came out and up until this most current version, you were always in an edit session. I mean, right now I could go in and edit, start creating new features, deleting features, reshaping, all those things, changing attributes in Pro without having to start and stop an edit session. That scared the bejesus out of a lot of us long-term ArcMap users. We liked having the safety net of having to start that edit session to keep our data protected. So what they've done with this most recent version of Pro is they've actually added an option that you have to turn on. It's not the default, but if you go to options and under editing, you can scroll down and you'll see this enable and disable editing from the edit tab. When you enable this, also notice the autosave. Okay. When I go back to my edit tab, now there's a button. If that button's not highlighted, I can't edit my data. If that button's highlighted, that's the same as starting an edit session. Now I can edit. So if that was one of your reasons for not wanting to go into Pro because you were afraid you or your users might accidentally edit data, there is now an option you can enable that basically recreates or has that same functionality as starting and stopping editing. Okay. So with that, let's go back to our PowerPoint, talk about a few other things. There we go. So there are some things that ArcPro does not do that ArcMap does. So one of those is geometric networks. So ArcPro will allow you to view, print, query data that takes part in a geometric network. It does not allow you to edit data that's part of a geometric network. You cannot create a geometric network in ArcPro. You can't do analysis on a geometric network, using the network tools in Pro. What they have done, and I don't know why, but they've decided to replace the geometric network with two things. The first is the utility network. And the utility network is a combination data model and tool set that works on network data for building, constructing the data, doing the analysis, publishing it to web and mobile services, and so on. Very complex structure and whatnot. There are tools to convert a geometric network to the utility network. I don't know how well they work personally. I do have some folks here at the Davie Resource Group that do know that pretty well. We've done several conversions over to the utility network. I can tell you it's not necessarily an easy task, but once you get it in there, there's a lot of capability. If you don't want to go that far, with 2.6.2 of ArcPro, they introduced something called the trace network. The trace network is basically, from what I can tell, the same thing as a geometric network, but they call it something different. But the same basic functionality is there as the geometric network. The caveat to the trace network right now is it only works in file geodatabases. They haven't ported that functionality into SDE. And I'm sure that once you create a trace network with data, it breaks the geometric network, and then you can't use that in ArcMap. So once you go to a trace network, you're stuck in Pro and you can't go back. Okay, that's something that I should add, is that most things you create in ArcMap can come forward into Pro, but things you create in Pro don't go back to ArcMap. Now that doesn't include, like if you create a file geodatabase in Pro, yes, you can use it in ArcMap. If you create a shape file in Pro, yes, you can use it in ArcMap. What I'm talking about is these things like the trace network or the utility network and that kind of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're using cartographic representations, that's not supported in Pro. I believe they're expecting you to start using their arcade expression language to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. ArcPro doesn't support coverages. I'm not even sure if there's tools to convert coverage to something else in Pro. I shouldn't be I don't know if too many people still using coverage. Matter of fact, I don't know anybody still using coverages out there. Personal geodatabases, on the other hand, ArcPro does not read, connect to, view, even acknowledge the existence of personal geodatabases. So those MDB files from Microsoft Access, Pro will not even know they exist. So if you have data in a personal geodatabase, you want to go to Pro, you're going to have to port that over to a file geodatabase. which is not necessarily a bad thing. File geodatabases tend to perform much better than a personal geodatabase. The downside to that, if you're like me, when I used to use personal geodatabases a lot, I would use Access to on the back end and that's where I did a lot of my reports and charts and graphs in, because I liked that process better than what Esri had. So that's going away if you did that. You'll have to, again, go to the file. And if you're a current user of the ArcMap parcel fabric, ArcPro doesn't work with that either, just like the geometric networks. You can view the data, look at the data, print the data, query data, but you can't create a new parcel fabric in the ArcMap version. You can't edit the data in an ArcMap parcel fabric and all that. What you will have to do is use, let's see, where is it at? The ArcPro. See right here is, whoops, didn't expect that to do that. The ArcPro parcel fabric. So why Esri had to come up with a different version of the parcel fabric, I don't know. But there is a new one for ArcPro, and there are tools to go from the ArcMap parcel fabric to the ArcPro parcel fabric. If you really want to know more, I don't know if, I know Frank Conklin was doing a presentation on the differences between the ArcMap parcel fabric and the ArcPro. I don't know if he did it yesterday or he's doing it today. But if you're interested, you ought to go check that one out. I'm sure it'll be a great one. Frank really knows the parcel fabric stuff inside and out more so than.
It's today.
It's today? Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'd encourage you to go check it out. Like I said, he is the guru on the parcel fabric. He's the one I go to when I have questions about that. So encourage that. One nice thing with Pro that ArcMap doesn't do is edit workspaces or edit multiple workspaces at one time. So if you're not sure what the term workspaces means, that's basically where's your data stored. Is it in a geodatabase? Is it in a file because it's shape files? I'm sorry, is it in a folder because it's shape files? Is it coming from a web service? In ArcMap, if you had a map that pulled data from multiple locations, when you started an edit session, you had to pick which one of those locations you wanted to edit. In ArcPro, if it's editable, if it's in an editable format, meaning it's a geodatabase, a shapefile, or a DBF file, or an info file, or web feature service or whatever, you can edit. You don't have to keep going back and forth and picking which one. Now, you can choose which layers are editable. So you can, if you don't want to accidentally edit one that's in an editable workspace, you can turn it off, or turn off editing for that. But yeah, you don't have to keep going, which makes the map topology, which allows you to edit multiple layers in multiple workspaces using topology tools at one time, much more flexible, much more usable and powerful than what it ever was in ArcMap. So that's good to know. Which then also leads to the fact that we can edit feature services. So the same web services you're publishing out for collector, survey 123, any web apps or whatever, you can bring those directly into Pro and begin editing those as well, assuming they're, editing's allowed. This is really great if you look at things now where so many people are working from home. You publish, assuming, well, and you do this through ArcOnline or whatnot, you publish out a web service, and then everybody can access that same web service, which is much more efficient than going in, connecting to a VPN, connecting to the data source, or then remoting into a virtual machine or a physical machine and going publishing things out as web services. Then everybody can access it via the web with the right security credentials and make whatever changes they're allowed to make on that service. So that really is a great plus for Pro right now, is that ability to do that. Let's see, we've already talked about displaying 3D features, so that's good. There is direct integration with AGUL and Portal. We see that through licensing. Your licenses by default, you can change this, but by default, license assignments for Pro is handled directly through Portal or AGUL. But you can't change that. We got great increased support for 3D formats such as voxel layers, greater support for LiDAR data. Esri's also their new notebooks, which I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to delve into, but that's now supported in Pro. That's new functionality you will not see in ArcMap, as well as Arcade, their new expression language. So this is kind of a light combination between Python and VBA. you can use it to control symbology on features, to control labeling on features, and to even control or create virtual fields in the pop-up window. So when you do like the Identify in Arc Pro, the nice thing with Arcade is it's supported across the Esri platform from Arc Pro, ArcGIS Enterprise, and ArcGIS Online. So a lot of good things there. So we got about 5 minutes left if my clock is right. See, I got that one, Ned. You didn't have to give me the 5-minute warning.
There you go. So I do have a few questions coming in. Those guys from TLC GIS, let's see, Jacob Kopel. How about mapping to the root of a drive using UNC path, like you can do in our catalog, as opposed to mapping to a drive letter or subdirectory?
So is the question, can you
use it as a UNC path?
Oh, absolutely. Arc Pro actually prefers UNC paths to direct map drives.
And let's see, from Greg Malden, is using ArcMap to edit feature classes residing in a file geodatabase created in ArcPro supported? How about vice versa? I ask because we are experiencing some instability when going cross-platform, when doing cross-platform editing.
Okay, so in theory, yes, that it doesn't matter where the file geodatabase was created, whether it's in ArcMap, ArcCatalog, or ArcPro, you should be able to go back and forth between them. There are some caveats to that. Obviously, depending on the version of ArcMap you're using, the older the version, the greater chance that there's an issue, because ArcPro is going to create a file geodatabase that's at whatever the highest level of that is. I think it's 10.1 or whatever. So there may be some problems there. The other thing is if you institute ArcPro only features in that database, like say the utility network, for example, that may also cause some instability. Even if you're trying to edit data in ArcMap that's not part of that utility network, there may still be some things hung up in there that can cause that to be a problem. But if you're using straight common feature classes, relationship classes, even straight topologies, that it should work fine. I've not experienced any problem with it.
So I had a question, and I don't know if you saw the recent traffic about community maps and ESRI not supporting traditional cache base maps anymore. Do you think that's going to have a significant impact on ArcMap users, since they won't be able to use the vector tiles in ArcMap, or at least they can at this point?
Well, I would say yes, it's going to impact it, because Esri is not going to be adding any new functionality into ArcMap. So I don't expect them to add support for vector tiles in unless there's a big push from their user base.
Right.
If there's a big enough scream coming from the user base, and that includes some heavy hitters like Georgia Power, Duke Energy, I'm just, something of that line, then they might change their mind, but I wouldn't expect them, because they really want people to move to Pro.
Right. Absolutely. So I have a few more questions. Alex Harrell wants to know, I may have missed this, is there a difference in the model builder side of the ArcGIS Pro versus ArcMap?
Difference, I mean, it's a little different. Now, I've been able to port most of my models directly into Pro without a problem, which means basically I connect the toolbox and I open it. But there is it operates in the main window here. I was trying to find it maybe under analysis here. There it is. So, but basically the window's the same. It's the same drop and drag capability to add tools and add functions and all those things. So it's the way it works is not a whole lot different, and most of the models will import in. They've added some additional utilities and tools in the Pro version that makes it a little bit more powerful. but it's not that much. If you can do it in ArcMap, you can do it in Pro. It's not that much different.
All right, we have one more question and then we're going to have to cut this. This is the ultimate question from Joe Suglia. How much longer do you think ArcMap will be supported?
Well, that's a great question. As I was, I think I alluded to earlier, Esri keeps changing that target. You know, when ArcPro first came out, they were still saying it was going to be, 2 to 7 years, and that's been kind of every year that's kept the same. So they did recently have an article out that said they're going to keep supporting it, I think, for another at least 5 years going forward. So
There you go.
there you go. Yeah.
Question is it enough time before you retire?
Yeah, sadly it's not for me, but I like Pro, so I don't mind the migration, but
I don't either. So the one challenge that I made to myself when this started was anything you're asked to do, give a good 10-minute effort to try to do it in Pro before you go back to ArcMap. And that way you're forcing yourself to learn it.
Yep. And it's once you get comfortable with it, I like I said, I'm more comfortable now moving and navigating through Pro than I am ArcMap. If I go back to say teach an ArcMap class, it takes me a little bit to go, where was that again? Oh yeah, it's over here thing. So like I said, it's just very nice to be able to pick on a layer and then here's the tools so I can go up and change the appearance or control my label settings or get into, the data with the fields and subtypes and all that. It's just so much easier than remembering you have to go right click here and do that there. So
yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Do you have any wrap-up comments you want to give?
No, just if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to shoot me an email. Here's my contact information. You can either reach me at tripp.corbin@davy.com, or if you still have my old EGIS email, that still works too, because EGIS is now part of the Davy Resource Group. So feel free to reach out, and you can, of course, always hit me up on the SHRUG group list.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a good rest of the workshop. We hope to see you in lots of other sessions. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.